In this video, we're going to be exploring the role of ChatGPT in code generation. So let's think about how we could use ChatGPT for our benefit when it comes to generating code, because sometimes as coders, we find ourselves writing code that's kind of redundant or repetitive, and it's almost what we call boilerplate code, which is basically reoccurring, and it's kind of a structure that's going to always be there. It doesn't really take brain power to come up with per se, but it definitely helps to kind of automate this process, and that's definitely something that ChatGPT can help with. So let's ask ChatGPT to write a simple website for us. Do you write a simple website for me? Now, this could be a pretty loaded question, so it may be the case that it will ask me to sort of clarify the constraints of this website. So what exactly do I want? What kind of features do I want to see on this website? So that's kind of exactly what it's coming up with. It's not able to create one from scratch. You need to decide on the purpose and content of your website. So now it's actually kind of giving me sort of this way that I can go about building a website, and it's almost kind of dodging the question. But we'll see that if I actually kind of reword this question, I can actually get it to report to me what I want. And one thing that's worth noting is that sometimes you do need a little bit of domain knowledge to know what to ask for. So that's what I'm going to try to give to you in this course. So one thing that's really big when it comes to website building is that there is these files called HTML files, which can actually author very simple websites. So maybe I want a simple portfolio website written in HTML. So if we say something like that, ChatGPT sure enough says, sure, I'd be happy to provide you with that. So this is a basic example. You can modify it to fit your specific needs. So if we go ahead and look in here, we see that it's actually writing us code right now. And one thing that's a little weird is that it's saying that, I don't know if you guys are familiar with code snippets, but typically when it shows up in this block of text with this different font, this is what's known as a coding snippet, and in certain types of languages that are used to express text, they kind of stylize it in this way. And it's kind of weird that up here it says PHP, which happens to be another language that is not what's shown here. This is clearly an HTML file. So that is what we're going to be using as our base for our website. Now, it's not going to be one that's deployed at some domain name or URL, so we're not going to be able to access it on the internet. But sure enough, it is a layout for a website. So it's telling us exactly what it does too. So it's saying it includes the basic structure of a portfolio website and the things that it's included for us for free almost. So we can go ahead and copy this code, come over to Visual Studio Code. Now I've just created a folder on my desktop that basically is just going to hold a file called website.html. It doesn't have to be called website.html, that's just what I'm calling it. But it does have to have this file extension HTML, because that kind of hints at your operating system that it's something you want to open with your web browser. So if we go ahead and do that, and we paste that in and save it, just using Control S as a shortcut, I'm going to actually go ahead and open that in my file explorer, and I'm going to open it. So as you can see, that kind of went to Google Chrome, which is my web browser of choice. And now we can see that this local file is being referenced and it's been opened. And sure enough, that's a website right there for us. And if we wanted to go through and substitute out these things, my portfolio, my name, this is sort of just like a template for a website. It's kind of like the bone structure of a template, or of a website, if you will. So if I go ahead and change that and refresh the file, you'll see that my name actually appears there. So if you didn't know anything about this before, this is like a really useful tool for just coming up with a basic website. And there are ways to make it look better, which is CSS. So, and it actually mentions that right here. Keep in mind that you'll need to create a style.css file to add styles to your website and make it look visually appealing. So that's something you could continue probing ChatGPT about and asking it to generate styles for you. Now, this is a pretty bare bones thing, so we're going to actually try to take it a step ahead and try to get it to use a framework that's known as React for building a website. So how would I go about creating a web app using the React framework? So let's see what it tells us here, because these problems are actually well documented online. So this is a framework that coders can use. It's essentially coders building on top of other people's code. So Facebook actually created this framework called React, and people have used it to help create their web apps. And here it's saying creating a web app using the React framework involves a few steps. And it's basically telling us how we can do that. We're going to need to install node.js, the node package manager. This is basically the runtime for JavaScript. And then this is a way to install packages, or basically sort of components or modules that you'll need to install into your project. So there's tons of instructions online about how you could go about doing that, or you could even ask ChatGPT how you could do that. Luckily for me, I already actually had these things installed, so I'm not actually going to go ahead and do that. So let's instead ask, how could I create a React app? So to create a new React app, you can use a command line tool called Create React App, which is the official way to start a new single page React application. That's exactly what I was looking for, actually. So it actually is able to tell me this based off of the internet data that it synthesized. And here it's actually giving me the exact answers that or sort of steps that I need to follow to do that. Now, one thing that's worth noting is maybe in the earlier question that I asked about how you could write a simple website for me, basically it doesn't know what our specs are, right? Like ChatGPT isn't sort of this all-powerful being in the sense that it's going to be able to be an endless pool of creativity. Like you as a human, this unique human and technology interaction is something that together can be very fruitful. It's not like a magic spell that we can suddenly just use and it'll be the cure-all to everything, right? So there does require a little bit of domain knowledge to know what to ask it. But once you know that, lots of doors are opened, so to speak. So once you have this installed, after you have the node package manager, we can actually run this command. Interesting that these code snippets are labeled Lua as well, because that's a scripting language that is definitely not being used here. Quite the opposite of that, we're actually going to be running this command, npx create react app, my app, in the command line. So if you go ahead and run that, it's going to run this command on an app called my app. And it's also going to create a directory for us. And as we can see here, a directory has been created. And we can look inside that a file has been created. This progress bar that shows here is also representative of that app kind of being generated as we speak. And yeah, so we're just going to give this a second to run. But in the meantime, we can continue kind of looking through what ChatGPT has prescribed for us. So we can see here that once you do generate this, we're gonna want to change directory. That's what the CD stands for. So it's pretty interesting. Here it actually has the correct sort of code snippet detail here. So it's actually Bash. I'm not using Bash because I'm on Windows, but I'm using the PowerShell window here. You can see PS, which is the Windows equivalent of the command line, essentially. And basically, we're going to change directories into this. Directory is just another computer science way of saying file. So once we're in that directory, we can basically run this npm start. Again, this code snippet is kind of off. SQL, or standard query language, is a sort of language that we can use to manipulate databases or interact with databases. And that's clearly not what's supposed to be here. So sometimes you gotta be a little above ChatGPT in the sense that you kind of have to know what it's trying to say, because here this is definitely not a SQL command, but we're gonna go ahead and run these commands anyways.